You're ready for this? Yo, who's the daddy? Easy guys, Dom here from Cringy Dad Gaming. So in this video we're just going to have a look at the Division beta. We're going to look at the good and the bad. I'm going to start by getting the bad out of the way. So, you know, how bad was the Division beta, or at least the bad things in the Division beta. Maybe starting the video off with, you know, the glass is half empty kind of vibe, but to be honest with you, I think if we get the bad out of the way, that's the main thing that really we want to look at this point. If we're going to invest into the new game, and especially from, you know, the popularity of the first one, then we want to know what the bad is. The first thing that I encountered that was maybe a little bit negative for me was the texture popping. It's quite bad in this game. I noticed a lot of the surrounding scenery popping in quite a lot, you know, not loading in correctly at all. Some cases, some signs were just totally blurry to the point where, you know, signs and buildings actually looked like it was in Minecraft. That for me is a bit of a game killer. It really did ruin the overall environment, and it wasn't just the buildings was failing to load. Sometimes it was the floor, sometimes it was the debris surrounding the, you know, outside of buildings. To me it actually felt like it looked worse graphically than the first Division, to the point where I did actually load up the first Division game and thought, yeah, the textures do actually look better. Overall, in places you can see that the Division 2 is going to look, you know, more superior to that game once these errors are corrected within the game code, which I know it's a beta, you know, and that's the whole point of these betas. I think with it though being so close to launch, you would have thought that these sorts of things, like, you know, the rendering of you know, buildings and environmental textures, lighting, particles, etc., would all be kind of there at this point, being so close to release. Let's just hope Ubisoft get that all ironed out before the game releases. While we're talking about graphics, I noticed in the menu there's less options for you to change the graphical settings within the game. The first game had this wonderful setting that allowed you to change the dynamic lighting, which actually kind of made it look a little bit more realistic in terms of how dark the actual areas were. That's been removed in this, or at least it is in the beta. The only thing that was there was for you to be able to sharpen the image. Now, I do know that one thing I like about PC games is being able to tinker around with different graphical settings to get more of a balance between frame rate and, you know, the way the game looks. I think really to incorporate that into console games nowadays is a real big thing. I've noticed a few console games lately actually having these settings where you can actually change certain graphical settings to be able to get a balance. I think by taking that away from the Division 2, maybe a disadvantage to some of these games now that have that in there. I'd like to maybe see Ubisoft bring something in like that to at least put it back into line with the first Division game, to give us a few options, but if not, to add more options. Some other bugs that I found within the game were sound issues with guns going silent. I noticed a lot of times it was to do really with things like mounted weapons, like the miniguns that you find around. These mounted weapons would often be firing without any sound. That's maybe a little bit of a frustration if you're actually on the gun yourself. But if it's the enemy and they're shooting at you with this gun and you can't hear it, you don't know where it's coming from. Sometimes you don't have enough warning to be able to take cover, and that for me was a little bit annoying. But believe it or not, that was pretty much the only bad that I came across in the game. Yeah, they're quite important things, but they can be fixed. Everything else that I'm going to list now is pretty much all the good stuff. So you see what I've done? I got the bad news out of the way first, and now we can move on to the great stuff. So the good. Less spongy enemies at last. One thing I really did dislike within the first Division game was the sponginess of the enemies, especially in the end game when you was really ranking up and you was able to change the difficulty in the world. Now I know that, you know, that point there I made the difficulty means that it should be harder to kill enemies, but any of you that played the Division at those really hard levels would know that unless you had some really good equipment that you'd probably spent over a year farming to get, some of these enemies would just absorb your bullets and your damage, and it was really frustrating. I mean, it was actually pretty laughable and unrealistic to the point where you think even with body armor, no one or nothing could ever take that amount of damage. And I know it's a fictitious world, I know it's, you know, it's not meant to be real life, but there still has to be, again, a little bit of balance between that. In this game now, I like how, yes, you've still got enemies that are harder and they've still got their weak spots, but if you can find a way to actually ruin their armor, you know, such as the body armor or the helmet, you will then actually get more damage in there. And I really like that when you can shoot off or blow off enemy's helmet or armor using your weapons to then you know, allow you to be able to shoot that weak spot. And that for me was a game changer. That made the game much more enjoyable and a lot less stressful. The world looks more overgrown, you know, a little bit like I Am Legend, if you've ever watched that. It's almost like nature taking over, which is what would happen if there was less people in the world, less people to, you know, keep the weeds from the cracks in the pavement. You'd start finding wild animals roaming around the inner cities, you know, so I did notice things like deers and foxes. I know there are some other wildlife in the world, but I've yet to see them. And just that for me just made it feel like a little bit more of a post-apocalyptic world, so to speak. Now, I know New York was in a colder period, so a lot of the environments were covered with snow in the original. I think we're in more of a sunnier or say summery or spring climate within Washington DC in this second installment, so there is the ability to have a little bit more of those green colors coming through. And for me, in places in the game, it did take away from the look of the first game. Although you can have some really lush areas, one area that I was really impressed with and really stood out to me was actually the Dark Zone. The Dark Zone just looks amazing in this game. It's actually one of my favourite areas. You can go from that kind of cold environment within New York to then a really cold environment in the Dark Zone, and there's not really much difference between the two. I did kind of find this time round that even though the world has areas that are decayed and overgrown, the Dark Zone itself was just another level. It was almost like stepping into kind of a jungly environment in one area that I was in, and I just really liked that. I just really liked that overgrown decay. That just made the Dark Zone stand out to me, and that'll look really spooky and eerie, especially a night cycle if you're in there in a night cycle. I found it was a better way to connect to other agents. You've still got the matchmaking system in the game, but if you are playing free roam and you come across a menu option to invite other players, you can use that, but you don't necessarily have to. You can just literally fire a flare. I found that when I was running through one section of the game, I got a call from another agent to come and assist them. I could literally just press and hold down on the touchpad of the game to be able to instantly connect to them to give them help, and I really like that. I really like that, to be able to get kind of like almost an emergency call. I just felt that was pretty cool. So I don't necessarily have to be connected to matchmaking to be able to actually join someone if I felt like it. So that was pretty cool. I had no issues with any disconnects. I didn't have any problems with any laggy games that I'd connected to. That's a good sign, considering that the game is predominantly co-op and, you know, multiplayer type game modes. Then we want to make sure that we are getting a decent infrastructure in place. I think by the looks of the beta, at least what I came across, that is going to be the case. I think we're going to have quite a good connection in the game, which is really, really important. So I'm really happy about that. More lore within the game. In the first game, you'd come across mobile phones and things like that, recordings that would give you a little bit of backstory about people within the game, some of them more important characters than others. I did find that there was more, or at least it seemed like in the area that we're in, there was more lore recordings to come across. I'm not a big reader, and I tend to find when I play role-playing games or action games where you find a lot of the lore is actually just letters and you have to read through 100 pages, that really turns me off. Having it voice recorded and, you know, well voice acted. Law recordings really makes a difference to me. That adds into the enjoyment of the game. So you can just continue listening to these recordings while you play through the game, and it means you can pick up a little bit of that backstory, or at least from the inhabitants of Washington DC, what they've gone through while this virus has taken hold of people. I did find that the AI was a lot better in this game in terms of their strategy. You know, in a lot of the game play that I played in the original, it would usually just be the enemies would pretty much just kind of run at you head on, and it wasn't really that difficult to deal with them, or at least that's how I remember it when I played that game. In this, I felt that the AI was a little bit more cunning. If there was like a heavy dude suppressing you, then there would be maybe one or two that would actually try and flank you. I like that, because that's what you would do in this game. You would get one of your friends to maybe suppress enemies, and you'd try and get around the back of them to be able to do a little bit more damage. I found that happening a lot more often, at least with Lone Wolf, which is what I tend to play. I tend to play a Lone Wolf character, so you know, without having anyone watching my back, I'd had to be extra vigilant to make sure that these enemies weren't flanking me. So that was a positive thing that I found. I want there to be a bit more of a challenge, not a challenge from just the spongy enemies that used to be in the original game, but the fact that in this game they're gonna try and outwit you. And also I felt it seemed like their weapons did more damage as well, so it really forced me to use the cover to cover system a lot more, which again I really like. I do like those cover to cover type games. The cover to cover system still works really well, where you can, you know, literally just look at a piece of cover, press and hold down on the button for you to be able to run over to that cover. That's great. And I did notice there's also an option now for you to free parkour, so before you'd have to hold down on a button to be able to mantle automatically when you was running, there is actually an option now where you can actually mantle without having to press that button. Although I would find sometimes if I was trying to go into cover, there could be issues with maybe mantling by mistake. I didn't try that option out, so maybe that's something that I'll try in the final release and see how I get on. So things like character cosmetics, in the original game you used to have to go all the way back to the base and go to a woman to be able to buy new cosmetical things. I didn't really come across cosmetics that you could actually purchase in game or get in game. Sometimes cosmetic items like clothing would be given to you by people you helped in the world. Didn't come across any of that. I did like how you could change things like your hat and t-shirts and trousers and trainers and stuff like that within the character menu. The new character menu looked much nicer. It looked more like what you'd expect from a role-playing game, so that was a jump up that I felt was a nice addition to the game. So it makes it a lot easier for you to you know, be able to access that. New skills like drones, that's pretty cool. I know in the original E3 preview of The Division there was a drone. They removed it for some reason, maybe down to technical issues with the game. It's actually in this, and I know that's got a lot of people excited. The drone does have a few different levels, such as all the other skill powers do, where you can change them. So things like being able to heal people, or just generally just pester other bad guys. And another thing that I also picked up on with some of these powers as well, things like the turret, the flame or mini turret that you can get, and now has a snipe option as well, which is really cool. And things like the seeker drone and stuff like that, you can now actually select which enemy it attacks before it's attacked it, or change it on the fly if you've got things like the turret. So when you highlight a particular enemy, it'll give you the option to be able to press one of your trigger buttons to be able to actually say suppress a particular enemy, and I really like that. It's a nice little touch to the combat, and it's little things like that that's going to make this game work so much better. They're already building rather than taking away on what's there within the game. So yes, a lot of these skill powers are going to be ones that you're familiar with from the last game, but I'm a big believer of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I like games that keep the strong elements and work on it to make it better. So being able to add those little elements where you can actually now select a particular enemy for you to use your sniper turret on, or for your seeker drone to go after, I just think is pretty cool, and I really did like that. One thing I just forgot to mention earlier was things like your health. The health system now is more down to like an armor system. You know how armored enemies would have the armor that you'd have to take down before you could then deplete the health. Well, now you're in that same kind of scenario where you actually put in armored plates or replacing armored plates into your body armor to be able to increase your armor back up, rather than, you know, actually using, say, stim packs or something to be able to you know, heal yourself. I like that. You can, as you progress through the game, actually build up how much of that armor you can carry, how strong that armor is. I do like that system. That seemed to work pretty nice within the game. So, endgame content. I found that there's new enemy types included in the game, Endgame. Did get a chance to play a little bit of that in the beta. Not going to kind of go into it too much because it could potentially maybe be classed as a spoiler, I don't know. But towards the end game, you do get new enemy types. Some of them are mech type enemies, like robotic type enemies that almost had a little bit of a Metal Gear vibe to it. I kind of wasn't too sure about that. I wasn't too sure if that was going a little bit too sci-fi. Maybe not. I mean, I do know there are a lot of more advanced you know, combats. What would they be classed as? I don't know, machines out there that we probably don't know about, and maybe we've seen a little bit of it on the internet, how our militaries are kind of getting a little bit more you know, advanced. So maybe that's where it's come from. We'll see how that works within the game. I don't know if that's going to be annoying or not. But having new enemy types, whoever they are, I mean, yeah, they're not zombies. I suppose they could have tried to incorporate zombies into this with the virus. They haven't. That's good. It's maybe a little bit more believable maybe within the story itself, but we'll just see how that plays out. But what I did like in the end game was how ultimately it felt more balanced. You know, I want to feel like a badass after I've leveled my character up. I don't want to feel like I'm still really underpowered against the end game enemies, and in this I did feel that. I felt some of the end game weapons, like I had a chance to play with a crossbow that fired these explosive bolts, which was really cool. Everyone loves a cool crossbow in a game, and you know, for me it just meant that I have got something cool to work my way up to within the game, which is what I like. I don't want to feel like I'm grinding needlessly for nothing. I want to feel like there is some rewards along the way. So don't forget, guys, to pop in the comments your experience with the beta, if you've had an experience, anything negative or anything positive that you liked in the game, but also if you haven't played the beta and you've got any questions, just don't forget to pop them in the comments. But that's pretty much it, really. That's the good, the bad and the ugly, I guess, from the Division beta. And at this stage, despite those few issues at the start of the video that I mentioned, I really am looking forward to play this game. And if you're looking forward to play this game, don't forget to like the video, and I will catch you guys on another video, and thanks for watching.
You're ready for this? Yo, who's the daddy?